Every spring, millions of people sit down at their kitchen tables to calculate their taxes, only to be met by the sudden sting of a new hike, a number slamming down on the ledger that feels less like a fair contribution and more like a penalty. It is incredibly easy to look at the entity collecting that money and see a giant, inefficient machine, a sprawling bureaucracy that mismanages public funds, creates endless red tape, or even acts as an active adversary to your own financial survival. When you feel like a system is rigged against you, a specific kind of logic starts to take hold. If the rules are unfair to begin with, blurring the lines on your return, padding a deduction here, concealing a freelance gig there, starts to feel entirely justifiable. This diagram illustrates how we process that justification. We start treating honesty as a sliding scale. On one side, we place our commitment to the truth. On the other side, we place the government's merit. If we decide the authority is corrupt or unjust, we lower their merit, and our obligation to tell the truth automatically drops right along with it. But making the truth a conditional transaction gives away all your agency. You are no longer acting on your own principles. Your entire moral compass is being dictated by the worst behavior of whoever happens to be taxing you. Which brings us to a highly practical question. Does falsifying a few numbers actually balance the scales of justice? Or does lowering your standards to match a corrupt system introduce a fatal flaw into your own character? The Quranic answer to that question leaves absolutely zero room for ambiguity. Falsifying details on a tax return, even if you are entirely convinced the tax is unnecessary or artificially inflated, is categorically impermissible. Deception is simply off the table. There is a specific rule governing this in Surah 5, verse 8. It explicitly warns that emotional bias and enmity toward an adversary are direct threats to correct judgment. The anger you feel toward a sprawling bureaucracy is exactly the emotion the verse says must not dictate your actions. True justice has to survive your own grievance. It requires meting out exactly what a party deserves, no more and no less. You cannot let another entity's unfairness turn you away from fair dealing. This relies on the concept of amana, or the trust. When a believer accepts this trust, honesty becomes an internal, self-imposed standard. It operates entirely independently of whether the other party happens to deserve it. Your integrity is not a hostage to your opponent's behavior. It is an unconditional imperative that you apply to yourself, regardless of who is sitting across the table. To understand why padding deductions is so destructive, we have to look at Surah 83. It outlines a structural hypocrisy known as giving short measure, demanding full value for yourself while deliberately shortchanging others. This chart visualizes that exact dynamic in a modern context. On the left side, we see the massive outputs demanded from the state: roads, infrastructure, security, and public services pouring toward the user. On the right side, we see the inputs, the taxes actually paid to fund them. When someone relies on what the Quran calls devious utterance, replacing factual reporting with guesses and loopholes, this input side artificially shrinks. The individual demands the full weight of the state's benefits, while quietly rigging the scale to lower their own contribution. Beyond the legal implications of rigging the scale, these repeated small injustices and the constant hunt for loopholes create a lasting internal consequence. They begin to corrode the person doing it. The text warns that these actions literally cast a veil over the heart. This is an active epistemic damage. The habit of faking details warps your cognitive health and permanently degrades your own ability to judge right from wrong. Any money saved through tax evasion is temporary. The true cost is permanent, because a lie told to the state always begins and ends as a lie told to yourself. This leaves us with a highly practical dilemma. If a tax is genuinely oppressive and deception is strictly off limits, are you supposed to just sit there and quietly suffer the financial drain? Not at all. The text offers several principled alternatives to an oppressive environment: patience, lawful protest, candid and honest argument, and perhaps most powerfully, the tool of hijra. When most people hear the word hijra, they picture this: a physical migration, the historical act of fleeing a dangerous geography and walking into the desert to escape persecution. But the full scope of hijra extends far beyond moving your physical address. At its core, it is the active, strategic principle of removing yourself from an unfavorable situation and relocating to a favorable one. This financial flowchart illustrates how that applies directly to your taxes. If a specific sector, say real estate, becomes a massive, unjust burden, the correct response isn't to commit fraud. The response is draining capital away from those heavily taxed assets and legally rerouting it into alternative investments. By intentionally keeping your wealth away from those oppressive financial burdens, you are performing a very real, modern execution of Hijra. You are migrating your resources away from harm. Your circumstances and your investments are flexible, but your integrity is fixed. The highest form of resilience against an unjust system isn't figuring out how to cheat it. It is learning how to outmaneuver it entirely within the bounds of the law without sacrificing your soul.